about it, and he's
not.
flying back.
Directors, right?
There's
He's
been
not
reported
on-
that he has meetings with the Principals Committee tomorrow at the White House.
I can't confirm that right now, but I can say that I believe it's going to be Tom Shannon who attends tomorrow's meeting.
Mark, just
I'll
a
get
quick
you.
one on this.
Yeah,
What are you, the Secretary said we're not giving up on the Syrian people and we're not abandoning the pursuit of peace. So other than discussing options, what are you actually doing to pursue peace in Syria?
Well, again, I think there's always going to be ongoing discussions about the best way forward, and looking at the various options. I mean, I'm not coming out here with anything to announce or anything to even really signal as a direction we may be headed. We're looking at a range of things to do. But I think what's important here is that there are other options out there. There are other players in this region, and we can work, we believe, in a multilateral way. We did so once before when the ISSG was first formed to get a cessation of hostilities in place. No one's underestimating, frankly, the challenge here, because when you've got what is, by any sense or definition, an ongoing assault on the people of Aleppo, that's going to be hard. But we're going to continue to pursue efforts.
Mark, I just want
I'll get to you.
follow up on a couple of things. You said that you have sadly and reluctantly, basically, walked away from the ceasefire. What was the one event, and I mean, you've talked about this before, but could you tell us now, what was the one event that basically made you walk away from this deal? Was it the bombing of the convoy? Was it the continuous bombing? What?
Well, I mean, it's hard to pinpoint one event. Certainly the bombing of the humanitarian convoy after over a week of trying to get that convoy up and running and get it the access and the papers and all the documentation that it needed to get into Syria, only to have it bombed was demoralizing, to say the least, and an outrage. And we said as much. But then the fact that was followed with, as I said, a full-on assault on Aleppo, it called into question, I think, the very feasibility or reality of a cessation of hostilities, or even what we had talked about, which was a 7-day suspension, or rather, not suspension, but a reduction in the level of violence. We had 2 or 3 days where we talked about there was a significant reduction in violence. And we talked about at the time, there were violations on both sides. But then as you went into the weekend, I'm talking about the weekend before UNGA for UN General Assembly, it really started to deteriorate.
So in terms of timeline, because the suspension happened 2 weeks after the bombing, it did not impact walking away.
I think, again, and Secretary spoke to this several times, we continued to talk to Russia about actions that we felt could be taken to reestablish the credibility of the process, and that didn't happen.
And Ambassador Turkin yesterday said basically that what sort of broke the ceasefire was the fact that you guys did not want to do something that you obligated yourself to, which is separation or separating, the terrorists from the moderate opposition.
Yeah.
Why is that such a daunting task? Why is that such a difficult thing to do?
Well, look, we've spoken to this many times. Right. It's a hard thing to do, given the circumstances, and it was only made harder by the fact that many of these groups were under assault, under attack by the regime, aided and abetted by Russian air forces. It didn't make that piece of it any easier, but that's an ongoing challenge.
But isn't it true, though, that these groups were mixed with one another, and in fact that made it easiher for elements like Nusra to move about and arm and regroup?
But I mean, some. And again, we've talked about the dynamic there and the fact that, there is that mixing of some members of the opposition, moderate opposition, with Nusra. Part of that, again, is exacerbated by the fact that when the regime attacks them, they're defending themselves. And frankly, as we've said many times before, it drives them into the arms of the extremists. Please, go ahead. I'll get to you, Michelle.
Secretary Kerry said the Syrian regime and Russia seem to have rejected diplomacy. On September 12th, they were on a diplomatic path. Then something happened. What do you think led to the failure of diplomacy?
Well, again, I think it was, we had a succession of events that led us to the conclusion that there was no viability to this process going forward. And you know this, everybody in this room knows that this wasn't a decision made in haste. You know, there was a rough week at UN General Assembly, given some of the events on the ground in Syria, but we continue to keep that process going. But I think at a certain point, the decision was made. Sorry, but the decision was made that we felt that the process couldn't go on as such.
Didn't it fail after some rebel groups, specifically al-Sham in Aleppo, used the ceasefire to strengthen their positions? Didn't it fail after ISIL nearly took over Deir ez-Zor following the U.S. bombing of the Syrian military, admittedly by mistake? Did those things play no role in the failure of that deal? Well,
again, I think, look, and we've talked about this, there were a few good days of reduced violence in the beginning of the 7-day period. And then there was a series of events, certainly the attack by mistake on Syrian forces, but then followed by the attack on the humanitarian convoy, and then subsequently by an increase in attacks on civilian targets in Aleppo that were unconscionable, to say the least. And look, we can talk all about the fact that some rebel groups or some opposition groups may have used the pause to resupply. That's a reality, and that's something that the strategists looking at what was happening in Aleppo had taken into consideration. That was something that was worked out in great detail in the discussions we had prior to the September 10th agreement that we reached with Russia. We all knew the dynamics going into this, but we had to get to that 7-day period, and then we could have implemented the JIC, or the Joint Implementation Center. But we never got there. So you had to give this time, we had to give this time to really solidify. And we didn't, and we never got to the point where we could do that.
Just a few more. Yeah. Actually, can I have 2 more, please?
Okay.
Thanks much. Suspending ties with Moscow over the failure of that deal, was it a diplomatic move or a political one, in your view?
Well, I mean, I think it was a diplomatic move, and I would just note that, and we've talked about this before, it was a suspension. You know, we haven't permanently closed the door, but I think we would need to see something, some action by Russia or the regime, or both, that really led us to believe that there was any reason to pursue it again.
I'm going to quote, so the Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman today was quoted as saying, and I would like to get your reaction to that, quote, "The whole time we were involved in these negotiations, in this peace process, we realized clearly that the U.S. did not have a joint position. Different structures and organizations in Washington had different views on what's going on in Syria. We were dealing with people who were changing their view and opinion every day. That was the main reason why they failed in fulfilling those agreements," end quote. Was everyone on the U.S. side on the same page when negotiating the deal?
So we've been very clear about how the interagency process works in Washington or in the United States. We think it's very effective, and it creates a single policy and a single path forward. But to get there, part of that, rightfully so, should always be a matter of debate and discussion with alternate viewpoints and alternate options being presented. But ultimately, it's the president who decides the way forward, and he makes the decisions as the commander-in-chief.
Just one more, please. How did Secretary Kerry specifically evolve on diplomacy in Syria? He was taped recently saying that he argued for use of force. How did he evolve?
I'm sorry, I missed
how
did he evolve?
How did Secretary Kerry evolve in his position on diplomacy in Syria? He was taped recently saying that he argued for use of force.
Well, first of all,
how did he evolve?
I'm not going to speak to that, the fact that he was taped or his conversations that were private with members of the Syrian opposition. Look, Secretary Kerry has been very clear that he wants as robust a policy going forward to provide him the diplomatic leverage that he felt he needed in order to bring about a diplomatic process or a political transition in Syria.
Sorry, Mark, on your
Yeah,
answer, your answer to the penultimate question there,
Yes,
you
sir.
said that the interagency process is very effective and designed creates a single policy. Isn't the idea once the president makes up his mind and decides on the policy that the dissenters shut up and don't complain publicly?
Precisely. I mean, that's the,
Did that
that's the
happen in this
commander-in-chief.
case?
Again, on a policy and an issue as like Syria, I mean, any given day, if there's different elements and different dynamics to be considered, and I think that that always goes into. Yes.
Did it create a single policy with no dissent?
Yes.
Okay, it did, because there were a lot of people complaining about it.
I understand that there's
And not
I understand that
secretly,
there's the
not
perception of
whispering in the
that. I
background.
understand that there's a perception of that, but what I would say is that
Doesn't that compromise the effectiveness of this?
again, we carried out the policy that the president had dictated that he wanted to pursue to the utmost degree that we could.
Mark, you talked about coordinating with the partners in the ISSG
Yep.
form. Russia is a member of the ISSG.
They are.
Will they attend the meeting tomorrow? And
Tomorrow's not. I mean, it's it's made up of members, but it's not an ISSG meeting. There is, I believe, just at the working level, an ISSG meeting in Geneva. I'm not sure whether Russia will take. I think so. I'll let the Germans speak to who's participating, but I believe.
but
that's
Russia
Sorry.
will be there or not?
Tomorrow in Berlin? I don't believe so. But again, I'd refer you to the German. They're going to be, and I don't know whether there's going to be a working level ISSG meeting in Geneva, but that's a routine meeting, but those are ongoing.
Russia co-chairs the ISSG.
Correct.
And
Correct.
That means they should be there.
I'm just not going to speak to whether they're participating or not. I just don't know.
My second question is, news reports said that Russia has deployed for the first time S-300 on-time missile system to Syria, in addition to the S-400. Can you confirm these reports?
Don't know if we can confirm categorically or definitively yet, but we saw the announcement. Doesn't seem consistent with their stated goals, which are to counter extremists, as in ISIL and Al Qaeda, neither of which, last time I checked, have an air force.
What does it mean for you?
Our first goal is to protect U.S. interests, national security interests. We're going to continue to do that. We're going to continue to carry out our counter ISIL operations in Syria, and we're going to continue to protect our air forces, our airwomen and airmen as they carry out those missions.
Does it give you pause when you consider, let's say, maybe targeting Syrian targets in Syria and so on, Air Force targets, airplanes?
Again, I'm no
and so on,
military
by
expert.
air?
I'm no military expert, but
Because
given
these are obviously intended for, fighter aircrafts and jets and cruise missiles, as a matter of fact.
I won't challenge your assumption, but we haven't confirmed definitively. I haven't seen a Russian confirmation that they're actually deployed. What's that? They have confirmed?
The defense.
No, I haven't seen it.
Also said something like that. There's a missile called the S-23, which is designed for
Again, there are these.
shoot down a cruise missile.
We note their deployment then, and and as I said, it seems inconsistent with their goals.
Is the U.S. going to be continuing doing what it's been doing in Syria, or is it waiting for a new strategy?
Well, I think so. Yes, in the sense that we're going to continue to carry out support for groups within the counter-ISIL, counter-Daesh coalition, those groups that are fighting in northern Syria to clear out, to destroy and degrade Daesh. We're also going to continue to carry out airstrikes. In fact, yesterday you saw that, as the Pentagon confirmed, there was a strike against a senior Al Qaeda figure that was carried out. Again, it shows the fact that through our strikes, we're able to carry out very targeted strikes against senior leadership rather than wholesale hitting of areas that include civilian populations. But just in general, we're going to continue those operations full stop. And with regard to the way forward and the civil war in Syria, we're talking to like-minded allies, partners within the ISSG, and we're meeting internally as a government to plot out next steps.
What are requirements that it's looking for the next multilateral agreement? What are main stipulations?
Well, I mean, again, what we want is, I mean, we thought we were there with Russia, but what we want to see is